By the end of 1992, we thought we had most of the geologic puzzle figured out. The Alma King Pocket was discovered along the intersection of two structures. So that led us to the conclusion that when two structures intersect, it creates open space. And the bigger the structures, the bigger the open space. The bigger the open space, the bigger potential crystals might have grown there. So with that as a model, we went back to our maps and looked at all of the potential structural intersections that we had available to us throughout the mine. And in 1993, in April, we began just systematically knocking off those targets. Unfortunately for us, none of the targets panned out that year. So while we understood that pockets had to occur along structural intersections, it was also clear that not all structural intersections created pockets. So we were obviously missing something. We didn't know what the heck that was, but it was so frustrating that by the end of 1993, we thought about quitting and just taking what we had and moving on. But since we had done so well in 1992 and hit these wonderful two pockets, we had enough inventory and enough cash now to try it for one more year. Since we had had absolutely no success in the areas of 1993, we completely abandoned those areas, and we went to two new areas.
One crew went to what was called the watercourse vein, a vein parallel to the main stope about 20 feet away. They started a raise there along a promising structural intersection. The crew found several small pockets, but the crystals were all pink and etched. Meanwhile, another crew worked near the entrance to the mine in the second crosscut. They were drifting on a structure that had yielded some good rhodochrosite crystals back in 1925.
Both of those areas had good structure, they had good strong veins, and both areas looked like they could produce something, but just yet hadn't. So as we continued through July and then into September, we were starting to get just a little bit desperate. But the desperation really showed when Dean and I would have conversations about where we ought to go in the mine. Dean was convinced that the 1925 structure would yield something.
The intent here, based on my mapping of east-west crossfault in two spots in this vicinity, was to drive south along the 1925 structure exposed here, roughly 70 feet to the intersection of the two structures where a warp in the fault plane should occur, and hopefully an opening that hosts a crystal pocket.
The watercourse raise was only producing a few small pockets with poor quality rhodochrosite, and Dean's project was not producing any rhodochrosite pockets. Worse yet, it was getting into bad ground. This required time-consuming work, shoring up unstable rock to prevent cave-ins. Bryan was becoming more and more concerned about letting the drift continue.
And there was no guarantee of finding anything anywhere, but particularly not before the 70 feet out. So the entire 6-foot increments from 0 to 70 feet was a hot debate the whole time about whether we were going to find anything, and all I could say was, we're not to where we're going yet.
Dean said, look, Bryan, we need to continue. Everything's right here. Let's go another round. Well, I'd say, okay, go another round. And he did. And then we wouldn't find anything. Then the next day, go, let's go another round. And say, okay. And we did. And we didn't find anything. That happened about 3 or 4 times. In the meantime, we were continuing on our way up through the watercourse raise.
In late September, the crew drilled into an incredible pocket of crystals at the top of the raise. This pocket was called the corner pocket. It produced many spectacular gemmy crystals on matrix.
Ironically, on the same day that we hit that pocket up in the watercourse raise, Dean and I were still going through this argument. One more round? No, not one more round. When he did it, he convinced me to go one more round. I said, this is absolutely finally the last round.
So we were finally allowed to take the one more round. We needed to get out in the vicinity of 70 feet where the target was projected. And I was rather anxious to see what was in there because I still believed in the target. So I came in after lunch, after Scott and I had shot it. Came in, it was still quite smoky in there, and I knew it was either do or die as far as finding something back there. I noticed a widening of the vein in the back, which is the ceiling of the drift, where a distinct crossfault had come from left to right, which proved to be the structure I had mapped and projected out to this vicinity. And as I watched the back, it was full of white clay, which is very indicative of the bottom of a pocket. And when I tapped on this clay, a gush of crystals came flying out, one of which hit me on the bridge of the nose and cut my nose.
We were collecting up in the watercourse rays when Dean climbed up the ladder with a big cut on his nose. I said, "What the heck happened to you?" And he reached around and placed a 2-inch rhodochrosite crystal on the platform. I just looked at him like this. "You got to be kidding me." He says, "No." He says, "You ought to come and look." The pocket we had discovered on the 1925 structure was immense. You could see up several feet into the pocket, and rhodochrosite was stacked up in there like cordwood. There were hundreds and thousands of crystals. After we finished collecting that pocket, we brought all the pieces down to Golden and put them up on the racks. It was such an astounding sight, and there was so much material there that an idea crossed my mind. I'd always wanted to reconstruct a pocket of crystals, and what better time to do it than when we had all this beautiful rhodochrosite. I was able to get a meeting with Bill Coors and talk to him about the idea of reconstructing an entire pocket of rhodochrosite. He was excited about the idea and immediately contacted the Coors Foundation.
The Coors Foundation decided to proceed with the project. The Collector's Edge staff built a huge sandbox and carefully started to reconstruct the pocket. Over 3,000 pieces had to be meticulously puzzled back together. The work took about 1.5 years to complete.
While we were rebuilding this pocket, the museum was busy putting together a chamber to house this thing in. And then they surrounded it with this mine tunnel that they created by going up and taking actual casts off the wall of a mine. So when the whole thing was done and the pocket was in place, you could have this feeling of walking down through a mine tunnel and then having it open up into this wonderful crystal cavity. After all was said and done and the pocket was finally in place in the museum, and given the Coors Foundation's involvement in the whole process, we decided to call it the Coors Pocket.
Use the link in the description to buy the complete video.